Hello, my beautiful blossoms, blooms, and buds. I'm Rosebud Reads, and welcome to my book garden. Welcome also to Copper Coins, Book 3, Part 4, which is very exciting because it's the second to last one of the whole series. So this is very exciting. Also because we left off on Heartbreak last time. So, ow. But anyway, I'm very much looking forward to seeing where we go today. Hey, ready for the sad? Oh, I know, Ember. Me too. No, so we ended on quite the cliffhanger last time. Hello, Truffle. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to the sadness and heartbreak. Although we might be surprised. Who knows? But yes. Anyway, this is a chill stream. What that means is that I will be talking to my lovely book garden as I have been. I might occasionally talk to myself, talk to the book, double check something online, show a picture of something. We're very chill here. That's not everybody's flavor of stream, which is totally okay. Some people just want to hear the story, and that's perfectly fine. But maybe stick around, see what happens, and you might be you never know. If not, no hard feelings. But yes, heartbreak seems to be the theme of the week. I watched the next to last episode of Veil of Shadows, and ouch, that is on my list. But from what I've heard of it, yeah, ouch. Yuchi deserves so much better. But yeah. Continuing on, this is a mature stream, so that's 17 plus, because these books do have themes of gore, fighting, bloodshed, sometimes sexy times, but usually those ones first. Acts against humanity and general cruelty. So some of these can be pretty triggering. This one, thankfully, not so much. Some of the other books we've read, they're a lot more descriptive. But anyway, if you are here during the live, there's only so much I can do. Usually I'll pick up on when we're starting to get a bit darker in theme and can be like, hey, looks like it's going here. If you need to log off and come back after the stream, see what happened. If something happened, that's perfectly okay. If you are watching this from after the stream, you'll note in the title whether or not there's something that says trigger warning. And then if it does, you'll see it in the title, the description with a simplified description of what happened and what trigger it's for, and then you'll also find it time-stamped in the actual video. But yes. Hello, Annika. Hex against Dragonity? Oh, yeah, for Shushian. Yes. I have to say, I really like all the actors in Veils of Shadows. But yeah. Take care of your mental health. No hard feelings on this side. We're all here, as I said, for a good time. We're here for the Danmei, we're here for the story, but we also want to take care of ourselves. So be kind to yourself and your mental health. And if things start getting a little hairy and it's bothering you, it's okay to click away. But yes, hello, Annika. And hello, Ruby. Man, everybody's tuning in early for the heartbreak. I love it. I am not sponsored. I do this because I can, because I enjoy it and I want to get these books out there. If I ever do get sponsored, I will be very excited about it, and you all will be the first to know. But I highly doubt it's ever going to happen, or it's going to happen very, very further on in the future. But I don't make anything, nor do I own anything except for the physical copy that is resting over there, and my time, sometimes not even that. I am also not fluent, though I do try my best, and I feel like I've been getting better with names and places, which are the ones that usually trip me up. But if I am ever butchering something severely, please just shoot me a comment. Let me know, like, hey, it's said this way. Or the like, either live or later, and I will do my best to fix it. Just be nice. I do this for fun, and as I said, I'm not fluent, but I feel like I do a pretty good job. But yeah. Yep. That's why Meat Bun has a fan base, and we all do love pain. Yeah, most of these have pain. But yeah. Okay. Moving right along, I am excited to share a few things. I mean, like always. So you guys know that I'm part of the pin club for Buchanel, and we got 2 this time. So I think it's April and May. So we have Beauty's Blade, and then of course Qualian. But yeah, they're absolutely gorgeous as always. In my shaky hands. Yeah. Let's go lesbians! And of course, they always come with their absolutely gorgeous stickers. So the art, don't focus on my face, focus on the pictures. But yes. So that's that. And then also I just wanted to show off something I did while I was visiting my brother. Since we have so many bees, when I saw there was a 3D printed bee at the farmer's market, we hobbled over to. I had to, of course, dazzle the bee, and he's going to just kind of chill on my shelf. Since there's a ridiculous amount of bumblebees in Yowie and Donmei. But yes. So now we also have bees in my basement. But yes. Okay. So these will eventually go on my lovely pin board over there. But for now, they're going to go over here. But yes, thank you. I'm glad you like that, Annika. It is absolutely understandable. No offense, I think Meat Bun's pain is too much for me. Meat Bun goes hard with the pain. So yes. That's perfectly understandable, Ruby. Meat Bun, they pull no punches. To put it lightly. They definitely pull no punches. Okay. Yeah, those books can be rough reads, especially late in the series. Yes. Love eating the pain, but it's still pain. Nearly threw a couple of her books against the wall. That's also understandable, Truffle. It's sitting on my shelf, so I'll get to it eventually. So I'm thinking we're talking about Beauty's Blade. We'll also get to it eventually. But yeah. Okay. I think we're gonna just start in on the pain. It's a little earlier than usual. Oh wait, I lied. no promises, but I recently ordered a travel microphone, so I might actually do something from the convention I'm at this weekend, like just a little short video or something where it's maybe like just showing off my merch. But I don't know if I'm going to do that. It depends on how crazy busy it is. It depends on what I find. Depends on if I can figure out how to work the microphones. But um you might see a little video pop up where it says I'm live. We'll see. The one good thing about the plumber not coming was I sort of organized my library books. Very nice. But yeah, we'll see. It's a different convention for me. I've never been to this one. I don't know what I'm getting into, if I'll even find merch. I'll always find merch. There's gonna be something. But I don't know if it's gonna be worth a video. But yeah. So we'll see. I'm gonna play it by ear. I'm going to be going kind of a more casual Zuzzy Lang. Kind of like a mix of Sha Hualing and Zuzzy Lang, so maybe female demoness Zuzzy Lang wearing combat boots. So we'll go. Oh, I might wear the sandals. We'll see. But yes, I just picked up a day ticket, so it's one of those situations. My friend was vending, and I decided, it's $30. Why not? But yes, now it's time for pain. Okay. Question for the gardening scum villain self-saving fic. Who would be funnier, Shang Qinghua or Shen Qingchu, or both? I mean, depends on what level of funny you want. Shang Qinghua is more the awkward hamster, so that would be kind of cute with the garden. Shen Qingchu is kind of more the I get way too into the demonic plants and everyone else around me is freaking out, potentially also falling into a pop plot. That could be for both of them, the pop plot. Depends on which pairing you want to represent, Lu Binghe, Lu Qingge, or if you want to do a Moby June, so Mo Shang. Both of them could be pretty funny. Like, I love both of those, or all of those, or even a Yu Qinghua, Yu Qing Yuan, not that different character, but yeah. It really depends on character takes up gardening to de-stress, ends up causing stress. Probably Shen Qingchu for that one. Because he does tend to hyperfixate. Although you could bring in the paperwork and being overstimulated with the Qinghua, where he's got too much paperwork and yet he wants to just go garden, but then he has the responsibility of remembering to water things and things are dying. And then there's one specific plant that's finicky where even if he does everything right, it's still not working. And then when he doesn't do it, it works. And then he just kind of, no matter what he does, it's the opposite. So I guess really which way you want to take it, but many options. I'm going to change the time for the recap. Okay. I hope that helped. Okay. So, last time, we ended with pain, where we were fighting the sorcerer. They kind of pop out and they're like, wait a minute. Chief Preceptor, or State Preceptor, what are you doing here? Why are you fighting me? Basically. And then we had the breakthrough of another copper coin, which of course brought memories. And since Shushian was connected through the copper coins, so he's going through kind of memories light. He's not getting everything from the memories, but he is going through it with Xuan Min, and he ends up seeing basically Xuan Min getting ready and having a mask. Actually, we're just gonna read it and re-experience the pain. Okay. So for one of the memories, he sees a child, and hears about how he's born with Buddha bones. A small child sits at a desk in the cold, and then he sees a signature at the bottom of the child's page that says Tai Chang, which is what the name was on the wall that had the life spiders and all the directions, and it was signed by Tai Chang. And it had a note, and it said, "Must not delay the journey to Mount Tai." So a dull roar filled Shushian's mind. He thought he must have misread, but before he could look closer, the scene trembled and shifted abruptly once more. He stood by the railing of a high pavilion. A palace lantern cast a hazy glow beside him. The lingering confusion from seeing Tong Dang had yet to fade. Oh yeah, and then beneath it he added 2 more characters, Tong Dang. The lingering confusion of seeing Tong Dang had yet to fade, leaving Shushian dazed for a long moment before he realized someone behind him was speaking. He didn't catch what was said, but he turned mechanically, walking to a stone table in the pavilion and pushing a sheet of paper forward. Then he opened his mouth to speak. Though the scene remained vague and the voice distant, Shushian could still recognize Xuan Min's timbre. He heard himself speak with Xuan Min's cold and detached voice. The year of Wu Chen, the 7th day of the 6th month. Xuan Min said more after that, or perhaps he asked a question, but Shushian didn't register a single word. A deafening buzz filled his ears. It was as if his entire body had turned to ice. That indifferent sentence looped over and over in his mind, and with each repetition, the chill deepened. The stabbing pain in his spine flared again, but Shushian sensed nothing. The year of Wu Chen was this very year, and the 7th day of the 6th month was none other than the day of his tribulation. Or rather, the day his tendons and bones had been ripped out. Disbelief crashed over Shushian, a suffocating weight that crushed downward, entangling him. In his daze, he desperately searched the scene for any other detail, anything that could prove those words a mere coincidence. But he only found the edge of the stone table, where something caught his eye. The moment it did, a feeling flickered in his hollow chest, so faint it didn't seem like his own. An emotion that might have been disgust. Shushian had no mind to dwell on it because he saw what was set on the table. 2 masks. One was silver, gleaming coldly under the lantern light. The other was painted with bold, archaic beast motifs, its solemn design flanked by long, knotted tendrils resembling wild hair taken from an actual beast. When worn, it would look like flowing locks from a distance. So if you remember, Shushian kind of suspected Xuan Min for a while at the beginning because his figure was a lot like the original one that he vaguely remembered ripping out his bones and tendons. But he was like, he had long flowing hair. And so Shushian kind of decided, no, it couldn't have been him. He said he's had a bald head for years. So he kind of put that to the side. But now, with the mask and the names and the dates, the pain. When worn, it would look like flowing locks from a distance. He stared at the beast pattern mask, his mind blank. The pain in his spine sharpened. It was unbearable. Like the agony of his missing spine had seeped into his heart, only to radiate outward, tinging his thoughts with panic and a little grief. The chaotic memories that followed blurred past, vanishing only when the copper coin's hum grew distant once more. Shushian suddenly squeezed his eyes shut, and after a long wait, he opened them. The valley came back into focus, right in front of Shushian, but somehow distant, as if it were in another world. At some point, Xuanmin had landed on a low peak nearby. The bell-like tolls lingered, echoing through the valley as the corpse's shrieks turned to wails. The century-old miasma of resentment slowly dissipated. A thick mist that obscured Xuanmin's face had risen in the valley. Shushian could only see him turn toward his direction, the copper coin still glowing in his hand. Pale golden runes formed a wide net, enveloping the entire valley. The light wasn't bright, but it seared Shushian's eyes. It reminded him of the golden threads that had bound him by the shore. The grief that had been small surged larger in his chest, heavier than he imagined, more suffocating than that inescapable net. It left even him a little stunned. Then from beneath the piles of bones in the valley, a voice rang out in shock and confusion. Stay Preceptor? Why are you here? Didn't the message say to meet at Mount Jiangsong? The man, who'd been tumbling about among the yin corpses, had revealed himself upon recognizing Xuanmin. His disguise still clung to him, making him nearly indistinguishable from the yin corpses. Chunks of rotting flesh had fallen away during his frantic escape, exposing a jumble of crooked bones. The surfaces were yellowed and blackened, reeking of decay. But the real corpses around him had collapsed under the golden light and been reduced to shattered bones, though wisps of resentment still clung to them. As he stood upright among them, he was impossible to miss. His head was a mere skull, cracked and wrapped in dried skin, the eye sockets empty voids, making his expression difficult to read. But from his gaping jaw, he seemed beyond bewildered. Had Shushian struck now, the man wouldn't have reacted in time. However, Shushian could no longer see him. Beyond the golden light of Xuanmin's coins, the valley might as well not have existed. All Shushian registered was the pain in his spine and agony that stabbed into his heart. It was like watching a blade sink into his chest. Terrifying coldness filled him, bitter as the deepest winter. Rocks, golden light, and thick mist separated him from Xuanmin. Shushian made no move to clear the haze. Through the watery mist, he stared silently at the white figure on the peak before repeating softly, "State Preceptor." In that instant, countless past details, both relevant and irrelevant, clear and foggy, flooded his mind in a disordered rush. With a single utterance of state preceptor, they abruptly snapped into focus. Unusual abilities, ties to the government, a personality that was fastidious to a fault, that procession that they encountered at Mount Boji. In truth, the clues about Xuanmin's identity had been everywhere. The vague unease plaguing him over the past few days, especially after they entered Baichang Cave, now revealed itself to be a subconscious dread, laced with even a hint of fear. He'd sensed it for a long time. He'd just chosen to ignore it. Even now, after experiencing Xuanmin's memories firsthand through the coins, he clung to one last shred of hope. He still wanted to hear it from Xuanmin's own lips. He'd play the fool if only Xuanmin would deny it. If only he'd say no. The year of Wu Chen, the 7th day of the 6th month, Xuxian murmured, staring at the white silhouette behind the mist. The figure seemed to stiffen, but the mist was too thick. He couldn't be sure if he was seeing things. What does that date mean? Xuxian asked, his voice eerily calm. In his entire life, he had never cared so deeply for another's answer. For a second, he almost regretted the question, wanted to take it back. He feared the truth like he never had before. But the man on the peak had once told him, "I won't lie to you." Xuanmin was silent for what felt like an eternity, so long that Xuxian's chest went numb. Then in a low, rough voice, he answered, "A dragon's tribulation." Xuxian's lashes fluttered. He closed his eyes. When they opened again, his face was blank. He cast a final glance at Xuanmin, then with a calm that bordered on terrifying, he said one word. "Excellent." Here comes the pain! And I was thinking of going with Shen because it's funnier to think of him yelling at a Bunzilla. Yes, that would be very funny, Truffle. I agree. Yep, Ruby, Ember, this part does hurt. Okay. All right. Chapter 36, Rivers of Blood. Dozens of miles away from Mount Jiangsong, in a small temple nestled against the hills, a young novice with a boyish face sat cross-legged by the window, reading scriptures. Oh yeah, by the way, our boys also got kidnapped by people in robes. Yeah. Hang on. My goodness. The rest of our party got kidnapped by dudes in robes. Okay, chapter 36, Rivers of Blood. Dozens of miles away from Mount Jiangsong, in a small temple nestled against the hills, a young novice with a boyish face sat cross-legged by the window, reading scriptures. Just as he was about to turn the page, dark clouds gathered outside, accompanied by flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder. The novice set down the scripture and leaned out of the window to look. Their temple was built against the mountain, and it was the highest point for miles around. From his vantage point, he could just make out another mountain in the distance. It stood before a vast river with a solitary temple perched atop it. The dark clouds and thunder had come out of nowhere without any sign, as if the heavens were suddenly grief-stricken and venting their wrath. The thunder clouds spread across the sky in an instant. They hung low and oppressive, pressing down on the temple roof with such weight that it felt as though one could reach out and touch them. The novice found the sight both strange and fascinating, and stretched out his hand to try. But before he could uncrook his fingers, a downpour began. The rain poured down in such torrents that the distant mountain vanished from sight, leaving behind only the faint silhouette of the lone temple. His hands were stunned by the pelting raindrops, and the gray sleeves of his robe were instantly drenched. The wet fabric plastered uncomfortably to his skin and clung to his arms, but the novice paid it no mind. He kept his eyes on the torrential downpour. For some reason, he felt as though the rain was a manifestation of some overwhelming sorrow, and it filled him with a sadness. He, too, felt as if he were trapped inside those dark clouds and struggling to breathe. Whew. Being young and having spent most of his life in the mountains, he rarely felt such unprompted emotions. He suddenly remembered a line from the scripture he'd just read, a phrase he couldn't comprehend. From love springs worry, from love springs fear. If one is free from love, there is neither worry nor fear. He stared at the rain in a daze for a long time until his senior brother came in and told him to close the window. Shixiong, I think I saw someone at that mountain temple earlier, the novice said. He turned toward the newcomer and pointed toward the faint, smoky shadow of the temple in the distance. His senior brother chuckled. What kind of eyes do you have to spot someone from that far away? Impossible. That's Dazi Temple, a notorious ghost temple. It's been abandoned for who knows how many years. There's no one there. I really saw someone, the novice insisted. Before the rain started. They were dressed in white right at the top of the pagoda. When I looked again, they were gone, he murmured, a quiet Amitabha, because his thoughts had drifted to ghosts and spirits. Even without his senior brother's words, he'd known that lonely building was Daze Temple. When he was younger, he'd overheard his monastic siblings mention it in passing. Many years ago, perhaps 100, perhaps 200, a young man from the southern border had his head shaved at Daze Temple. Before he could take his vows, the temple was struck by lightning and set ablaze. All the monks perished in the fire. Whenever the common folk brought up Daze Temple, not only did they lament its fate, they also speculated that the boy from the southern border was some kind of jinx, bringing misfortune upon others and himself. A decade or so later, rumors spread that a white-robed monk had been seen near Mount Jiangsang. There, apparently, he picked up an abandoned infant from the ruined gates of Daze Temple before leaving. A woodcutter who claimed to have seen the monk swore that when the monk rolled up his sleeves, his wrist bore tattoos unique to the southern border. Decades later, another white-robed monk had been spotted near Mount Jiangsang. This time, the monk didn't roll up his sleeves, so no one could confirm whether he bore the same tattoos. But he, too, took a child from the mountain and left. Of course, these rumors were unverifiable and never spread far. Now, only people in this temple, which overlooked Daze Temple, really mentioned them. The young novice remembered his senior brother, chuckling as he recounted. Master once told me the wildest rumor. It claimed that the boy from the southern border was the white-robed monk, and that the white-robed monk eventually became the state preceptor. Then what happened to the abandoned infant and the other child? The novice asked. Shixian scoffed. You actually believe that? How would I know? So in the novice's mind, that lonely ghost temple became something shrouded in myth, mysterious and unpredictable. It was a place where anything could happen. Stop daydreaming, his senior brother scolded. This rain is really coming down. I heard this morning that the county river has already overflowed. If this keeps up, it'll be up to our ankles. If you leave that window open, this room will be flooded before you know it. The novice nodded and reached for the window frame. Just as he was about to pull it shut, his gaze flickered upward and his hand froze. Shixian, what now? You can't even close a window properly? Exasperated, his senior brother moved to help, only to see the novice pointing at the dark clouds, murmuring in disbelief, I think I saw a dragon. His senior brother was about to knock him on the head for his nonsense when a long shadow draped in pale lightning flashed through the clouds. Its form was indistinct, but its shape was unmistakable, and the novice was right. It looked exactly like a dragon. Heavens, the senior brother gasped. The novice pointed at Mount Jiangsong, his face slack with shock. It's headed straight for Daze Temple! Meanwhile, inside that very temple atop Mount Jiangsong, the grand procession of the state preceptor's ritualists waited in the main hall. Well, they're about to get a surprise. The ancient fire hadn't burned for long, but because Daze Temple was remote and received few worshippers, it had only housed a handful of monks to begin with. No one had escaped because the lightning strike had come at night, but in truth, the fire had only ravaged the rear sections of the temple, leaving the front halls relatively intact. Following the state preceptor's instructions, the chief diviner and the chief ritualist had led 100-odd acolytes into the hall, where they now sat in opposite semicircles. The chief diviner was at the head, while the chief ritualist was at the rear. A small stone effigy carved with runes rested at the center of the circle's center, its surface covered top to bottom with complex yellow paper talismans. Its base was encircled by a line of blood. The chief diviner instructed each acolyte to prick their thumb and draw a drop of blood. Bright red beads oozed from the tiny wounds, and just as they were about to fall, a soft sigh echoed through the hall. So faint that it was swallowed by the crying wind outside. Only the chief diviner paused. No one else even reacted. Frowning, she scanned the room warily before remembering that they had thoroughly searched the hall upon arrival. There was no way an outsider could have been hiding here. Did I mishear? The chief diviner shook her head to clear the thought and returned to the task at hand. With a final instruction to the group, she pressed her bloodied thumb onto the ground in front of her. The 100-odd acolytes and the chief ritualist did the same. At once, hair-thin threads of blood began to spread from where their thumbs had touched the ground, slithering like living creatures toward the stone effigy at the center. Everyone closed their eyes and began to chant in low, murmuring voices. The droning hum spilled out from the hall, only to be swallowed instantly by the relentless downpour outside. At Mount Wangxi and Lake Dongting, the other groups from the Court of Imperial Sacrifices were doing the same. Sitting in circles around stone effigies the state preceptor had placed there earlier, pressing their bleeding thumbs to the ground. All right. Quick question. Do you think it's our state preceptor? Or do you think it's the state preceptor? Which one do we think it is? The one that's in seclusion or Xuan Min? Oh, caught. The most frustrating thing about this chapter is that none of them asked what the array was for. I mean, okay, Truffle, you gotta give them a little credit. They're acolytes. They're used to following directions. Yeah. My money's on the instruction being from the one that's not Xuan Min. This feels very quest for immortality from the other state preceptor. Let's see if we are correct. At the foot of Mount Jiangsong, upon which Daoze Temple stood, there was a forest of tall stone peaks called Heishi Shore, and beyond that lay the expanse of the river. The one in seclusion because Xuan Min is fighting the other guy. Same thought, Ruby. Currently, Heishi Shore was scattered with almost 200 people, all lying motionless. A quick glance revealed their pale, bloodless faces, closed eyes, and faint frowns. All of them were unconscious. At first sight, they looked like corpses, though their bodies had yet to stiffen. I mean, there's part of me that was like, well, they're dead. So, judging by their clothes and the objects they wore and carried, mostly tattered rags, worn-out coats, and threadbare garments that reeked with a sour stench, most were either beggars or refugees who'd fled their homes due to famine. Even those whose garments were whole were not wearing anything of quality. The calluses and cracks on their hands, along with their dry, darkened skin from years under the sun, betrayed their impoverished origins. Still, mixed among them were a handful who seemed a little better off. Travelers or lone wanderers who had been captured and brought here. Among these were Shi Tu Zhang and Lu Nianqi, who had been waiting at the tea house. Well, at least they're not dead. Although they kind of seem like they're about to be ritual sacrifices, or have been. Had they been awake, they would have been terrified by the scene before them. Nearly 200 people were arranged in semi-centric circles to form a massive human array. What did I say about human sacrifices? At its center stood a stone statue crudely carved into the life-size likeness of a monk standing on a lotus pedestal. From the rear, the monk's billowing robes lent it the serene aura of a stone Buddha, but from the front, its solemn face was hidden by an eerie, bestial mask. There was something malevolent about its appearance. Not yet dead. Mostly dead. Even more unsettling were the intricate runes carved into the robes of the statue. At a glance, they matched those on the smaller stone effigies at Daoze Temple, Mount Wanxi, and Lake Dongting. The sole difference was the archaic characters interspersed among the runes of the statue. Some kind of tribal script, perhaps. Can I just say, I'm proud of myself for just how easily those rolled off my tongue. Because they have progress. Had Xu Xian been present, he'd have recognized that these characters originated from that same source as those on the walls of Baichang Cave. The differences between them were minimal, limited to subtle stroke variations so slight that even the writer might have failed to notice if distracted. The lotus pedestal was plastered with yellow paper talismans, and beneath it, a line of blood also encircled its base. Nearly 200 people had been arranged with their heads facing the statue and their feet pointed outward. Despite the varied appearances and backgrounds, they shared one striking similarity. A blood-red dot between their brows that resembled a crimson mole. They do love their crimson mole in this. The river winds whipped and waves slammed ashore, one after another. Combined with the unceasing rain, it seemed like it would only be a matter of time before the water swelled high enough to swallow Mount Jiangsong whole. Yet the human array seemed to form an impenetrable barrier. Though the gales were fierce enough to cut flesh and cloth, the talismans on the lotus pedestal remained still. The rain poured, rising the river until it lapped at the shore, but not a single drop touched the robes of those lying within the array. Eerie. Outside the array, a company of gray-clad people knelt on one knee. They all wore masks that resembled those of the court of imperial sacrifices, except where the courts were mostly crimson, these masks were dark green, as if playing yin to their yang, shadow to their light. Each wore a peachwood pendant at their waist, identical to the one carried by the man who'd hidden beneath Xuan Min's bamboo pagoda. 180 people who matched the birth charts exactly. No more, no less. 90 yin, 90 yang, the leader of the gray-clad group announced. His voice, muffled by the mask and dispersed by the heavy rain, was muted and indistinct. The man that the group was kneeling before stood between two black stone peaks, facing Mount Jiangsong with his hands clasped behind his back. He wore pristine white monk robes, untouched by dust. The pouring rain seemed to vanish mere inches from him. It left not a trace of moisture on his robes. Tall and slender, his upright posture exuded an otherworldly aura, one that made people balk at studying him too hard or approaching him. His face was concealed behind a silver mask, revealing only a pair of midnight black eyes, and his head was tilted upward, his gaze locked on the summit of Mount Jiangsong. Though his expression appeared calm and indifferent, there was a hint of something else beneath the surface. Upon hearing the leader's report, he rubbed his clasped hands together, but his gaze remained unmoving. The gray-clad leader looked up, then quickly bowed their head in fear as they awaited the white-robed monk's command. The monk's slight pause made the gray-clad group anxious, as if they might have made countless blunders or committed an unforgivable misstep somewhere. But when the monk did speak, he sounded indifferent. "Did you disturb any unrelated civilians?" His voice carried a natural chill, like water when it was just freezing over. At this simple question, the gray-clad group trembled slightly. No, the leader hurried to say. "We only targeted remote areas. If there were any bystanders, we took them along as well, leaving no loose ends." The monk rubbed his fingers together again. "You took people?" No, invited them," the leader corrected. Invited. There was another long silence after this hasty amendment. Unable to resist, the leader peeked up and saw that the white-robed monk was still watching the summit of Mount Jiangsong. Though his eyes were not visible, the leader sensed a rare hint of emotion in the monk, as if this remote and nameless mountain held some inexplicable connection to him. Stunned by this realization, the leader found the courage to ask. "This place is remote and little known. Why did you choose it, State Preceptor?" As soon as the words were out, the leader wanted to slap himself to death right there. He had been raised and taught by the sorcerer Song Yun since he was 16, and he had been helping Song Yun and the State Preceptor with certain issues for 7 or 8 years now. However, he could count on his fingers the number of times he'd actually seen the State Preceptor. He mostly took his orders from Song Yun, then traveled throughout the land performing his assigned tasks. Despite their limited interactions, he knew the State Preceptor's personality. He was a temperamental man with a strong dislike for subordinates who overstepped their bounds and asked inappropriate questions. If me muffling my voice like that gets annoying, please let me know. What constituted an inappropriate question? The State Preceptor had never explicitly stated. But as far as the leader understood, it meant, don't ask anything at all. The State Preceptor had his reasons for every arrangement he made. How could anyone dare to question them? To the leader's surprise, the State Preceptor didn't grow angry, and he actually answered. Many years ago, I met an eminent person here. That was so very long ago. So long that even he could no longer remember how old he'd been, what he'd looked like, who his parents had been, or why they'd abandoned him in this remote mountain. If not for that eminent person, he might have already cycled through several reincarnations. How could he have attained all he had today? The gray-clad group's leader was momentarily stunned by this answer. Then he dropped his head back down. That eminent person must have had keen insight. Otherwise, how would we have the peace and prosperity of today? Keen insight. The state preceptor seemed to find this phrase amusing, or perhaps he was mocking him. Peace? If there were true peace, I wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. I wouldn't be standing here today, nor would I have to invite so many suffering commoners to join us. The leader didn't know how to respond. The state preceptor was usually so reticent. Wouldn't it be more awkward if he didn't seize this rare opportunity to speak? After a moment's thought, he ventured, "We are too foolish to share your burdens." The state preceptor's gaze swept over them, then returned to Mount Jiangsong. There will always be a use for you. No need for undue humility. As the monk looked at the abandoned temple atop the mountain, he suddenly raised his hands in a Buddhist salute. For him, this life had begun here, so it was only fitting that it should also end here. What do you... That's not ominous. That would make for a proper cycle. Moreover, what he was planning contradicted the original intentions of that noble person from the past. Thus, offering a moment of repentance before death would bring him some peace of mind. You know, things are about to get real when the bad guy explains things. Yeah. Thus, offering a moment of repentance before death would bring him some peace of mind. He believed that if that person were still alive, they would understand his painstaking efforts. When he raised his eyes, the talismans on the pedestal of the stone statue in the center of the human array rustled. One talisman faced Daze Temple, another Lake Dongting, and the last Mount Wanxi. The three talismans trembled simultaneously, emitting a sound like war banners flapping violently in the wind. Oh. Well, what do I have that could... Maybe... It's the best I got. Immediately after, the blood circle beneath the lotus pedestal glowed. The dried blood abruptly turned fresh again, so much so that it seemed to run slightly. The state preceptor turned and swept his sleeve. A sound like slashing blades rushed over the array, and in an instant the left thumb of each person placed in it split open. Crimson blood flowed from their wounds, dripping onto the ground to wind unnaturally toward the stone statue, drawn by some invisible force. Hundreds of blood threads slithered like serpents toward the statue, merging into its base in the blink of an eye. It was a horrifying sight. Though the gray-clad group had been prepared, witnessing this still left them cold with dread. They stared as the lotus pedestal was stained a dark red until the blood seemed to come alive. It climbed up the stone as if intent on dyeing the entire statue crimson. How much blood would that take? The gray-clad group didn't know. They only knew that every last drop would be drained from the people in the array. Not a single one would survive. Oh, we get a picture. That's creepy. illustrator did a fantastic job. Wow. Yeah, yikes. I agree, Esper. Or, yeah. And, how they mentioned everyone's gonna die. Remember, our boys are here. Lu Nianxi and Shitu Zhang are part of this array right now. They were still lost in shock when the state preceptor shot them a cold look and waved his sleeve again, sending out another blade of wind. The gray-clad group felt a sharp pain in their left thumbs. Before they could react, an immense force slammed their left hands to the ground. The force was so overwhelming that resistance was impossible. The group was thrown onto their stomachs, and they could do nothing but watch helplessly as their blood gushed from their fingers and flowed toward the stone statue, as if it were life itself being drained away. For a moment, they were frozen. Then they began to struggle wildly. Yet no matter how much strength they mustered or what method they tried, their left hands remained pinned to the ground, unmoving as their blood continued to flow. A realization hit the leader of the gray-clad group, who stared up in horror at the state preceptor, just in time to meet his downward gaze. Those pitch-black eyes held no ripple of emotion, as if what he looked upon were not living people at all, merely the grass and trees of this world. Through that utter calmness, the leader understood the deepest meaning behind the state preceptor's earlier words. There will always be a use for you. No need for undue humility. This guy is a terrible boss. Yes, he is, Truffle. Yes, he is. That was why the state preceptor had been so uncharacteristically talkative just now. In his eyes, he'd only been speaking to himself. No one would hear it. After all, the dead were no more than bones. They no longer counted as people. As the leader's blood slowly drained away, it seemed to take all the warmth from his body with it. He grew cold, his vision blurred, his mind fogged, and his neck could no longer support the weight of his head. In the midst of his bewildered terror, countless fragmented and scattered memories surfaced in his mind. He remembered the people he had grown up with in the mountains, now lying in the sea of blood alongside him. He remembered the first time he'd seen the state preceptor. Back then, he was just a child, ignorant of the world. He caught a glimpse of the state preceptor once while sneaking down the mountain behind Song Yun's back to watch the imperial procession pass through their county town. So many people had come, yet none dared to get too close. As he squeezed through the crowd to find a better vantage point, someone elbowed him, and he stumbled toward the procession. Just as he was about to fall, he felt something like a gust of snowy wind brush past him, light and effortless. It steadied him just enough to keep him upright. Too young to understand what had happened, he blinked in confusion and found himself standing safely at the roadside. When he looked up in astonishment, the procession had already moved ahead, yet he still caught a clear glimpse of the white-robed monk astride a tall horse. The memory was so distant, he thought it long forgotten, but at this moment it resurfaced. He hadn't feared the state preceptor as he did now when he was a child. He had revered him. When had that changed? When had every encounter with the state preceptor become filled with nothing but terror? Probably when it turned into a different person. Just I'm just saying. Following Sung Yoon's orders, he and his brothers had toiled in the shadows for years. How many missions had they carried out? He could no longer remember. When he first watched lives end at his hands, he'd been racked with guilt and panic. He'd even questioned Song Yoon, seeking the reason for it all. Song Yoon had said that everything they did was for the sake of the common people. Every small preparation was part of a large-scale array. Bones beneath the land. If completed, it would not only avert the great calamity they had foreseen, but ensure centuries of peace for the land. These matters were far too profound, and Song Yoon had never taught him the intricacies of such a vast array. He only remembered one phrase Song Yoon had repeated endlessly since his childhood. Achieving great things always requires sacrifice. He'd understood those words and carried them with him for many years until today. Until he watched his own blood spill, the gap between life and death narrowing to a mere blink. Only then did a great fear grip him, and he was plunged into panicking confusion. Those words were wrong, weren't they? They were missing something. At the very least, they should have asked if those people were willing to be sacrificed. After another futile struggle against death, his fading mind wavered. Perhaps those words weren't entirely wrong, but he wasn't so sure. Was the indifferent state preceptor truly acting for the sake of the people? Were the deaths of the 100+ people lying here and the bones buried beneath the river, and all the others dragged into this, truly necessary? Was it truly unavoidable? He no longer had the strength to voice these questions. He couldn't even muster the energy to look at the state preceptor one last time. In the deepening darkness, he slowly drifted into sleep, and most likely, he would never wake again. So, pause. I know I'm breaking the tension. Before before Shitu Zhang and such, before they were taken, or before they even went down the mountain, Shushian, dropped a drop of blood on them. So I wonder if that's going to come into play, as protection. I mean, he's having a justifiable crash out right now, but I think something's about to go better because I don't see Shitu Zhang and not Lu Qingga. Oh my gosh. Why am I having such trouble with names tonight? I think they're going to be okay. I would be very surprised if they're not okay. Sorry, I know. Shitu Zhang and Lu Nianqi. There we go. Sorry, it was gonna bug me. But yeah, I think Shushian is about to come into the scene. After another futile struggle against death, his fading mind wavered. Perhaps those words weren't entirely wrong, but he wasn't so sure. Was the indifferent state preceptor truly acting for the sake of the people? Were the deaths of the 100+ people lying here and the bones buried beneath the river and all the others dragged into this truly necessary? Was it truly unavoidable? He no longer had the strength to voice these questions. He couldn't even muster the energy to look at the state preceptor one last time. In the deepening darkness, he slowly drifted into sleep, and most likely he would never wake again. The blood flowing from the fingers of the gathered people finally colored the entire stone statue a dark crimson. Its otherworldly form had been replaced by an overwhelming malevolence. It seemed a sinister ritual had finally begun. The entirety of Mount Jiangsong, along with Heishi Shore, where the state preceptor stood, began to rumble. The river surged and the water slammed against the shore, only to halt behind the state preceptor and recede. It almost looked as if there were two opposing forces locked in a fierce struggle. The state preceptor sat cross-legged on the ground, palms pressed together as he murmured scriptures under his breath. An outsider might have thought he was performing rites for the dead, yet within the ancient cadence of the chant he uttered were discordant notes that grated on the ear. Behind him, black stones toppled. Before him, raging waves surged. The wind and rain arced over him, forming a protective dome that left him untouched. At first, there was no visible change. But when he finished a line of that scripture, dots of blood sprouted over his clasped fingertips. There were at least 100 of those unsettling spots in total. He continued chanting without acknowledging the spots. They seemed alive. With each solemn verse, they crept up the back of his hands, though their movements were agonizingly slow. The state preceptor's face was obscured by his silver mask, but a thin film of sweat soon beaded at his temples beneath the mask's edge, where it was pressed to his skin. His voice remained steady, but he was exerting immense effort. The spots of blood crawled from his hands to his forearms and disappeared into the wide sleeves of his robe. The tempestuous storm grew even fiercer, threatening to engulf everything in its wake. The small building on the distant riverbank was pounded by the furious waves, shaking violently until it finally succumbed. With a cacophony of splintering sounds, it toppled and plunged into the river in another colossal wave. At the same time, a brilliant golden thread, like a streak of lightning, raced along the opposite riverbank. With the speed of rolling thunder, it shot northeast. After passing a certain point in the river, it emitted a sharp crack, then veered southwest, straight toward Heishi's shore. Just as it passed Lake Dongting and Mount Huangshi, making a beeline for Daze Temple, a faint golden light began to emanate from beneath the state preceptor. The spots of blood had already traveled up his arms and neck to bloom upon his throat. It was a horrible thing. The ethereal monk, his neck and shoulders erupting with crimson spots. Spurred on by his reckless chanting, the spots continued to push upward toward his face. The moment the spots reached his chin, a bloody circle appeared on Heishi's shore. There was a flash of red light, then two figures materialized within the circle. One of them was attired in white hemp monk robes. His face was striking. There was an unearthly beauty to him, but also a frigid chill. It was a cold that made the heart seize, like it was at the edge of a bottomless abyss that had lain dormant beneath centuries of ice and snow. His hand was unceremoniously gripping the other man's collar. The other man was covered in blood, his once gray-blue robes tattered and caked with mud. Scratches covered his arms, neck, and face, as if 1,000 ants had been gnawing on him and driven to madness by the unbearable itch. He'd clawed himself into a gruesome mess. This bloodied man was the sorcerer Song Yun, who'd found himself trapped in the valley, and the one gripping his collar was Xuan Min. His expression was as cold as ever, but his dark eyes threatened an impending storm, and anyone who met his gaze would have been struck with an inexplicable fear. When Song Yoon landed and saw the state preceptor with his palms pressed together, his face first filled with confusion before that was replaced by alarm. "You're not! You!" Song Yoon jerked violently, trying to struggle free from Xuan Min's grip. Technically, I think that counts as a face count. That counts as a face count. So we have 5, 10, 15, 16, 17 for face count. After this chapter, I will read off all the others, but I don't want to keep breaking the tension. "You're not! You!" Song Yoon jerked violently, trying to struggle free from Xuan Min's grip. Xuan Min shifted his hand from the man's collar to clamp around his throat instead. Song Yoon had already been weakened by his ordeal in Baichong Cave. Otherwise, he would have put up more of a struggle and avoided his current wretched state. With Xuan Min's hand around his throat, his words came out slurred and strained. You're another... Before he could finish, Xuan Min's grip tightened. It wasn't in reaction to Song Yoon's words, but because Xuan Min had finished taking in everything. The storm, the human array on Heishi's shore, and the spots of blood crawling up the state preceptor's neck. Scruffing Song Yoon like a cat is a heck of a flex. Yeah. Earlier in the valley, the seal on the 4th copper coin had lifted, unlocking another fragment of Xuan Min's memories. These scattered recollections were tumultuous, like remnants of another lifetime, and far beyond what most could process immediately. Even before these memories returned, Xuan Min had already sensed that his connection to Xuxian was no simple one. He even suspected that the person he'd been searching for all along might have been Xuxian. Yet intuition was only intuition. A sliver of doubt had remained within him. Still, as his memories unveiled the moment he'd calculated the dragon's tribulation, he felt as though he'd been cast into darkness, hemmed in by towering cliffs, no sky in sight. His sin of stealing Xuxian's bones loomed there, plain to see. It was a chasm that no words could mend. So Xuxian had left without looking back, and Xuan Min couldn't follow. All he could do was watch as that long shadow vanished into the clouds, gone without a trace, never to be seen again. Perhaps they would never meet again in this lifetime. But regardless of whether Xuxian wished to see him, Xuan Min would repay his debt. He'd captured Song Yoon and drawn an array, teleporting himself to where the dragon bones were buried. No matter his original intentions, he would make amends in full. Bone for bone. If he'd caused the tribulation, he would quell it. If he'd taken others' lives, he would return them. However, when he actually arrived at Heishi's shore, what he saw was far from what he had expected. The silver-masked monk with his clasped hands was someone he recognized from his memories. In his childhood, this monk had punished Xuan Min by forcing him to transcribe scriptures in the snow. Yet the same monk had also taken him inside and warmed his blankets with a copper brazier, while sharing his worldly wisdom. The monk had watched Xuan Min settle into bed, then gently closed the door upon leaving. Long ago, he had called this monk Shifu, a title he hadn't used in decades. Xuan Min's grasp of events was still incomplete. He only remembered that many, many years passed. He had first called the monk that title. Baby's first heartbreak, right? The other man had given a long pause, then offered a cold, indifferent wave of his hand. This is but a meeting between old friends. I dare not claim the title of Shifu. For years, Xuan Min hadn't understood these words. Later, he had stopped thinking about them altogether. Now, though many of his memories had returned, few were related to the man in front of him. The instant he saw the monk, though, a complex emotion rose in his heart. Its origins were unclear, but it definitely wasn't the feeling a disciple should have upon seeing his master. For a second, Xuanmin frowned. Then, suddenly, he understood. Because around the monk, who so closely resembled Xuanmin, a brilliant array had been arranged. Not to save lives or bring salvation, but to steal fortune and merit through a life exchange ritual. Xuanmin's fingers tightened. Song Yun's eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. Surprised his neck hasn't snapped yet, let's be honest. With a flick of his wrist, Xuanmin tossed the limp man onto the stone shore and swept his sleeve outward. The raging waves heaved as blades of wind slammed into the array with a deafening crash. The invisible barrier shielding the array erupted in golden sparks. Xuanmin's blow was so intense that even the solid stone peaks along the edges crumbled into dust. Under his onslaught, golden hairline fractures sprouted over the barrier. Those cracks spread outward rapidly. The barrier was on the verge of exploding, only to be suppressed at the last moment by another force. Still seated on the Heishi shore, the state preceptor briefly paused his chanting. He flipped his palms outward, pushing toward the array before snapping back. During that pause, the spots creeping up his neck and chin also halted, only resuming their upward crawl when the chanting started anew. This happened with lightning speed, but even faster was the relentless gale hammering the barrier. Suddenly, it changed directions and rushed straight at the state preceptor. Clang! Hang on. Nope, that's not it. There we go. A golden barrier materialized around the state preceptor, deflecting the incoming winds with a resonant chime. A massive force was driven straight into the river's waves, where it struck the towering oncoming tide and somehow reversed its direction. The water barreled toward the distant other bank, with the power of 1,000 galloping steeds. Xuanmin flicked a copper coin and yanked his hand back. The full force of the surging waves became concentrated in his grip, the immense pull threatening to tear his arm from its socket. The agony was excruciating, but his expression remained unfazed. He tightened his fingers and yanked backward, single-handedly pulling back that massive wave. At the same time, his assault on the array intensified. Raging gust after raging gust slammed into the circular formation, creating shockwaves that shattered the surrounding stone peaks into tumbling rubble. As the attacks grew fiercer, the array's defenses began to falter, and the state preceptor's golden shield dimmed. The blades of wind slicing into it seemed on the verge of breaking through. Just as the array's foundation was about to be compromised, the distant Mount Jiangsong, along with the mountain range beyond, began to shudder uneasily, as though this small array were tied to a much greater formation, and disturbing one part would affect the whole. Xuanmin's brow creased. The fierce winds from the standoff whipped at his robes, but the storm and deluge outside the barrier still failed to reach this stretch of black stone beach. Just as he was about to flick the copper coin again, the state preceptor stopped chanting within the shield. Cease this futile struggle, he ordered. This blood array is linked to another, more powerful array beneath the land. If you persist, those who gave the bones buried beneath this mountain and the rivers will have died in vain. When the mountains had stirred earlier, Xuanmin had glimpsed a faint thread hidden within their shadows, just like the so-called spider silk he'd seen converging from the three sides of Mount Lianjiang. It was the connective thread between the arrays. A quick look at its path told Xuanmin that this was bones beneath the land. All right. Donkey count is sitting at 60, 70, 80, 96. 96. You think we're going to get to 100 this time? I hope so. We finished our Jiang Xining suffering at 24. Our face count is sitting at 17, and our wanted poster count is sitting at a solid 10. All right. All right. Chapter 37, Buddha Bones. There was no doubt about it. The enormous array spanning the earth behind him was bones beneath the land. Xuanmin had yet to recall the finer details of this array, but he remembered its structure and the key points within. Though it was tremendous in scale, it followed the same rule as all smaller arrays. A spiritual object was needed to anchor it. Though the world held many such objects, those capable of anchoring an array of that size were exceedingly rare. There was no more than 2, which the state preceptor had chosen was obvious. Yeah, chapter titles do just keep getting more ominous, Truffle, I agree. Xuanmin's gaze swept over the mountain range. The brightest thread, flickering faintly among the peaks, could be traced to the foundation of this immense array and the dragon bones within. The state preceptor had yet to finish when Xuanmin struck his coin again. Metallic clang rang out. Both the array and the shield buzzed like an angry wasp. The mask on the state preceptor's face split cleanly in 2, clattering to the ground, and his long closed eyes finally opened. He and Xuanmin were both dressed in pristine white monk robes, their statures and auras strikingly similar. When their eyes met, a flicker of surprise passed through both of them before it vanished just as quickly. In Xuanmin's fragmented memories, he had only seen his Shifu without his mask once or twice as a very young child. Even within the secluded Tianqi Institute, the man rarely revealed his face. Thus, Xuanmin's impression of his appearance had always been hazy. Now, upon closer inspection, the man bore only a passing resemblance to what Xuanmin remembered. So many details were different. Once the stunned silence passed, the seated state preceptor shook his head and let out a soft, mocking laugh. Xuanmin's memories of him were vague, but the reverse was not true. After all, it was the state preceptor who had found and raised Xuanmin from childhood. Hello, Esper Lady. Welcome to the pain. So, lots have happened. A lot of which can be summed up in this picture. There's a gigantic array. The state preceptor, not state preceptor, is doing a very dark ritual, which Lunian Qi and Shitu Zhang are unfortunately part of this, unwillingly, and are slated to die via blood loss. But we're learning about the different arrays. This might be one where you might have to go back and watch this one, just because there's so many tiny details. But basically, this is Xuanmin's Shifu, and Xuanmin is now fighting him and disturbing the array. The array that is based off of dragon bones. So we don't know for 100% certain if Xuanmin was the one who actually ripped out the bones, or if it was his Shifu, who's now like, you don't have to call me Shifu. But it's kind of implied that yes, he was. But yeah, now they're fighting. And the array is to steal fortune and luck, and it's humongous. Yeah, as he should, fight him. Yes. But that's kind of where we are. Once the stunned silence passed, the seated state preceptor shook his head and let out a soft, mocking laugh. Yeah, you're welcome. Schwanman's memories of him were vague, but the reverse was not true. After all, it was the state preceptor who had found and raised Schwanmin from childhood. The name Tong Dang had been passed down through 4 generations, or perhaps one could say 3. The man known as the state preceptor had been replaced again and again. Though the individuals weren't perfect copies, in their youth they used talismans and spiritual medicines to influence their appearances, ensuring some resemblance. Most of the time, the state preceptor wore a mask, so few ever saw his true face. Those who did went many years without seeing him again, whereupon any subtle shifts in his appearance were dismissed as natural. Moreover, few dared to stare openly at the state preceptor's face. Even when he wore his mask, most kept their gazes lowered in deference. Combined with the fact that each generation of state preceptors shared similar mannerisms and presence, that meant it was nearly impossible for outsiders to notice the substitutions. It was the handover period between the 2 state preceptors that required the most prudence. So, the most care and attention to detail. By then, the previous one had aged, while the successor was still in his prime. Thus, when the older state preceptor reached middle age, he began using wax and skin masks to adjust his appearance. Similarly, the younger replacement, whose features still bore their youthful air, employed various methods to minimize the difference between them. At first, it was the young Schwanmin who had followed the teachings and molded his appearance to match the state preceptors. Later, after Schwanmin became the head, the dynamic reversed, and the state preceptor went to great lengths to make himself resemble Schwanmin. Batman monks! Yeah, basically, Truffle. Then many things happened between them, and their masks became permanent, something they could never remove. Now, as they confronted each other, they realized with the start that they'd grown unfamiliar with each other's true faces. What a joke. Schwanmin coldly watched the disgusting spots on the state preceptor's chin, the sign that he was absorbing the fortune and merit of over 100 lives. Once these spots of blood converged at his brow, the array would be awakened. And since it was tied to bones beneath the land, its awakening would render the greater array irreversible. Never trust a state preceptor in a mask. Apparently. When the state preceptor had paused his chanting earlier, the blood spots had stopped moving. But now that they had reached his face, they seemed to have gained a life of their own. They continued their upward crawl even without the chant. Schwanmin struck with a toss of his sleeve, but the state preceptor was no longer playing the passive party. He leapt to his feet, his golden shield intact. Unless it's Shilian. I mean, even Shilian is kind of one of those where it's like that turned out kind of hairy too. So Schwanmin struck with a toss of his sleeve, but the state preceptor was no longer playing the passive party. He leapt to his feet, his golden shield intact. The moment they clashed, the array quaked. Towering waves surged toward Mount Jiangsong, engulfing Heishi shore. For a time, everything around them rumbled. Yeah, no, I agree with you there, Annika. I don't know if I'd trust him in his Guoshi era either. That kind of didn't end well. Schwanmin did not have the upper hand. One of his copper coins was still sealed, and for some reason, every move he and the state preceptor made felt strangely linked. Not like a mind link when he shared thoughts with Shuxian, but in the way that every attack he landed on the state preceptor was subtly weakened. I mean, That's fair. To be fair, the part of the problem was relative stirring the pot. Yeah. On top of that, Xuanmin had to constantly refocus on other places to prevent the rivers from overflowing and flooding the land. But the state preceptor could do little to Xuanmin either. The two of them remained locked in a stalemate. The copper coins in Xuanmin's hand grew hotter, the last sealed coin buzzing incessantly as if on the verge of melting. One more strike, and it might shatter entirely. The spots of blood on the state preceptor's face had passed his philtrum. Now they inched toward the space beneath his eyes. No amount of beauty could compensate for markings this sinister. His entire face had turned grotesque. As they battled, Xuanmin kept his attention fixed on the spots. Their propagation was accelerating. Once they reached the upper half of the face, it was as though some barrier had been breached. Soon they inched past his cheekbones, then his eyes, then his brow. Xuanmin's coin suddenly pulsed, and the final seal shattered at the last possible moment. Its old, weathered surface fell away, revealing the coin's gleaming body beneath. An enormous flood of memories engulfed him. Here we go. In his mind, he returned to his childhood, once again copying scriptures in the hall. The low desk had been specially prepared for his height. He stood, brush in hand, his posture practiced. Despite his young age, he moved as though he had done this 1,000 times before. Back then, copying scriptures wasn't to familiarize him with texts or to calm his mind. He had always been cold and reticent by nature. It was to train his handwriting, ensuring it matched the script in the handwritten sutras. The strangest thing was that, even without practice, his writing bore an 80% resemblance to the sutras. Puzzled by this oddity, he glanced at the state preceptor nearby after finishing a page. Shifu, who copied these scriptures? The state preceptor's fingers paused on his copper coins. His expression was difficult to make out due to the dimness of the corner. Xuanmin had no idea what he was thinking. After a moment, he answered quietly, Tong Dang. Xuanmin blinked. Tong Dang. Grunted the state preceptor, still focused on the coin. A glint of golden light flickered in his palm, brimming with spiritual energy. Xuanmin didn't understand. Shifu transcribed them? The state preceptor didn't look up. I've told you many times, don't call me Shifu. He paused. Those were transcribed by the previous Tong Dang. The previous one? The position of state preceptor is passed down through generations, but to the outside world remain the same man. So our Dharma name remains unchanged. It's always Tong Dang. I am the third. After another long silence, he said, In the future, you will also be Tong Dang. Veiled by the shadows in the corner, his expression stayed murky and inscrutable. Xuanmin was taken aback. Though naturally reserved, he was still young enough to feel curiosity. Then, what was your original name? He had almost reflexively called the state preceptor Shifu again, but managed to stop himself. Zhu Hong. Shu Hong. Or perhaps something else. I've forgotten, the state preceptor answered coolly. Xuanmin also remembered the first time he'd called himself Tong Dang. He had just turned 19, and his face still carried a trace of youthful innocence. He'd carefully applied a mask of fake skin to his cheeks, then covered it with a beast-pattern mask before leading a grand procession to Mount Tai. From then on, his appearances as the state preceptor grew increasingly frequent because Shu Hong was starting to falter as his age caught up with him. Amid the chaotic flood of memories, he caught glimpses of himself taking charge of the court of imperial sacrifices, the fragments tinged with the nostalgia of a distant dream. If Shu Hong had never changed his ways, perhaps he would have remained that way until the end of his life. Though Shu Hong had never wanted to be called Shifu, Xuanmin had still cherished his master's kindness. So when Shu Hong delayed his retirement and sought to re-engage with the Court of Imperial Sacrifices affairs, Xuanmin did not stop him. After all, Xuanmin had never been attached to the position of state preceptor. He preferred solitude in the mountains over the maneuvering within the imperial court. Despite presiding over the Court of Imperial Sacrifices for over a decade, he was content to return to Tianji Institute to Shu Hong and move to the Bamboo Pagoda in the valley. He'd been born carrying Buddha bones within his body, and his spiritual aptitude surpassed Shu Hong's, so Shu Hong still needed his help with certain matters. Even during his solitary days in the mountains, he remained connected to the court. Until Shu Hong asked him to calculate a dragon's tribulation period. "Why must we calculate this?" Xuanmin asked, frowning. He was atop the stargazing tower, having been summoned back to Tianji Institute. Shu Hong was standing by the round table. He'd changed his attire to avoid suspicion in case he was seen together with Xuanmin. "A few days ago, I foresaw that a great disaster will happen in 3 years," Shu Hong answered. "The dragon undergoing its tribulation is the likely catalyst. Calculating the period will allow us to prepare for it beforehand and prevent harm to the people." I call shenanigans. At the time, Xuanmin had found this a little strange. During his solitary days in the bamboo house, he'd vaguely sensed that something was amiss, but he lacked proof. Shu Hong's answer sounded reasonable, so after a brief hesitation, Xuanmin agreed. Later, when Xuanmin discovered that the true dragon had been stripped of its bones on the day of its tribulation, the long-buried rift suddenly ruptured. His master's early kindness was eroded away by countless fractures, some small, some huge, until every suspicious clue aligned, revealing a truth far more unimaginable than he had ever conceived. The souls and bones Shu Hang had manipulated coiled like a whip, shattering every last illusion of peace. Xuanmin was not one to hesitate. In his fury, he stormed into Tianji Institute, sealing Shu Hong's spiritual power and scattering his strength. But their shared connection from the life-sharing spider meant that Xuanmin himself was damaged by Shu Hong's injuries, leading to his complete memory loss. Just before his memories vanished, he hastily left himself a note and placed seals on his copper coins to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. Fragmented and scattered scenes from childhood to the present slotted into every empty space. It was as if he had awakened from a long dream. Xuanmin's mind finally cleared, but the sight before him made his brow knit. Shu Hong held the powerful thunder-calling fan at his fingertips. He used it to summon dozens of heavenly lightning bolts from the sky. However, instead of blasting Xuanmin into ashes, they formed a net above him and descended. There was no dodging this lightning. It would force Xuanmin to the ground. And during the brief moment his memories had distracted him, Shu Hong had already encircled him with another array. The array wasn't lethal. It was meant to puppet him. Once the lightning fell, it would erase his will, leaving him under Shu Hong's control. "How could I kill you?" Shu Hong said calmly among the gale. "As long as you listen." Just as the lightning pressed down from above and the array closed in from below, a long shadow pierced through the tumbling waves and swept Xuanmin away in the blink of an eye. Then with the flick of a tail, Shu Hong was cut off mid-sentence and barely dodged the attack. "Yeah! Let's go, Shu Xian!" The next moment, hundreds of divine lightning bolts crashed down with earth-shaking force. "Thunder calling fan," a voice jeered. "What kind of trash is that?" As the words fell, Xuanmin landed on Mount Jiangsong, while a black-robed figure descended on Heishi shore amid the thunder, slamming a palm into the river's agitated waves. The tremendous force barreled toward Shu Hong. The divine lightning carved deep craters into the ground, and fissures emanated outward. Some lanced into the river, others into the mountains. From deep within the mountain came the harsh crack of splitting stone. The rumbles echoed for miles, terrifying all who heard. Xian coming in hot to wreck everything. Yes, he is, Truffle. Well, you remember, they're still technically connected through the coins, so he probably saw at the very least an explanation of, oh, hey, it wasn't Xuan, or Xuanmin. From deep within the mountain came the divine lightning carved craters into the ground, and fissures emanated outward. Some lanced into the river, others into the mountains. From deep within the mountain came the harsh crack of splitting stone. The rumbles echoed for miles, terrifying all who heard. When the tidal wave crashed ashore, it shattered part of the mountain, which sent boulders tumbling into the rain to raise a surge of mist in their wake. As the wave receded, the crater left by the lightning was revealed. Shu Hong sat cross-legged inside, palms pressed together, chanting scriptures in a low voice. The golden shield encircling him had been destroyed. His white hemp robes were torn and charred, stained with blood. It was a wretched sight. He coughed violently as he chanted. Blood trickled out from the corner of his lips. Clearly, he had suffered grave injuries. Nevertheless, the red spots on his face still crept toward his brow. The completion of the array was imminent. But Xuxian's strike had slowed the spots' progress to their original agonizing pace. After a few more coughs, Shu Hong gave up on finishing the chant and opened his eyes. Strangely, even now, he showed no panic, like he still had a backup plan. Most people might have hesitated at this point, wary of giving him an opening. Too bad he was up against Xuxian. Shu Hong looked up. Beneath the dark clouds, a black-robed man stood tall, flickers of electricity still sparking at his feet. The flashes of thunder illuminated his pale skin and striking features, but his aura was dark and unruly. Even the curve of his lips carried a sinister edge. Most importantly, deep within his pitch-black pupils, a faint red glimmered, a sign of chi deviation. Whether mortal self-cultivators or divine beings of nature, all were susceptible to chi deviation. Perhaps they'd strayed down the wrong path during cultivation, inadvertently entering an array, ingested dangerous elixirs, or accumulated violent energy within their bodies for too long. When they reached a certain point, all they needed was a spark, and a chi deviation would be a blink away. In any of these cases, they'd become terrifying the moment they entered chi deviation, for they'd lose the ability to control themselves. The moment Shu Hong met the black-robed man's gaze, a barrage of black lightning struck him. Despite the bone-piercing agony Shu Hong was in, he gritted his teeth and reinforced his vital meridians with spiritual energy. Meanwhile, the black-robed man strode toward the crater through the lightning, an aura of malevolence around him. He looked down with cold indifference before tilting his head. A smirk curved his lips. "So, you're the one who stripped me of my bones." After a pause, he crouched, watching the endless lightning pelt down with detached amusement. "Listen, I'm a merciful person. Even if we line up all the bones in your body, they won't even be half as long as one of mine. Out of kindness, I'll consider us even, bone for bone. Since you made me watch as you ripped out my bones, I'll rip out yours while enjoying the view." As he spoke, he raised a hand. The slender, pale fingers there looked too pristine to have ever drawn blood. With a slight curl of his fingers, he grasped at the air and gently pulled his hand back. Shu Hong groaned, his clasped hands trembling. His left hand rushed to clutch at his right wrist. He felt as though the black-robed man was reaching through his flesh to rip out the bones of his fingers. The agony of bones separating from flesh was unbearable. In that moment, Shu Hong decided to gamble. The black-robed man had saved Xuan Min at a critical moment. Their relationship must not have been an ordinary one. The man couldn't care less about his suffering, but Xuan Min's? That was different. No one could ignore their companion's pain, even if he only hesitated for a second, as long as there was a sliver of a chance. "His life and mine are bonded," Shu Hong rasped. "If I die, he won't live long. As long as he lives, I cannot die. All pain inflicted on me is reflected onto him. Knowing this, will you still kill me?" Meanwhile, atop Mount Jiangsong, Xuan Min clenched his right hand tightly. His face betrayed no expression. If Shu Hong hadn't known it for a fact, he'd never have guessed Xuan Min was enduring excruciating pain. Why did he choose to endure? Others might not have understood, but Shu Hong knew Xuan Min's nature well. He'd always known it so well. Xuan Min's calm facade, his lack of reaction in the face of such agony, all of it was so he wouldn't disrupt the black-robed man as he exacted revenge. After all, grievances had to be settled personally. No one else had the right to interfere. Xuan Min's reaction confirmed Shu Hong's suspicion. Their relationship was far from ordinary. Shu Hong grew even more confident that his gamble would succeed. "Ooh, I bet they'll use the spiders, maybe." "Maybe, Ember. That's a pretty good guess." For some reason, the black-robed man only glanced indifferently at Mount Jiangsong. His eyes flickered for a few seconds with confusion, but then they chilled again. "Who's that? Should I know him?" He looked back at Shu Hong with a sneer. On the mountain, Xuan Min stiffened. He stared at the place where the black-robed man stood, then lowered his gaze and closed his eyes. After leaving the valley, Xu Xian had headed straight for Mount Jiangsong, guided only by Song Yun's words. He'd never experienced such an overwhelming grief before, bone-deep and inescapable. That sorrow fused with the grudge that hung over his bones, along with the rage that had built up in him over the past half-year. Those emotions churned within him, sending painful spasms through his heart. It was unbearable, far worse than even the lightning he had to endure during his tribulations. It pierced through his skin and bone, like it had torn open his lungs and heart. At last, even his mind grew hazy. A raging fire burned from his chest to his brain. When the flame subsided, all that remained was a hollow fog. 2 deviations were but a single thought away. He forgot what he'd experienced and whom he'd met. He only wished to release his fury. Even when he'd glimpsed Xuan Min's memories via the link through the coins, the clarity had been fleeting. Right after, his fury engulfed him once more. His body had moved faster than his mind for a moment, and he'd swept Xuan Min to safety. When the fury reclaimed him, he'd carelessly tossed Xuan Min onto the peaks of Mount Jiangsong. He'd heard Shu Hong's words, but in his maddened state, they meant nothing to him. He'd felt a jolt of confusion when he looked at Xuan Min, as if countless memories were rising inside him. None of them lingered, so he turned away. Still, for some reason, when he went to rip out Shu Hong's bones a second time, he couldn't help but glance at Mount Jiangsong again. There he saw Xuanmin standing with his head lowered. A wave of inexplicable sorrow surged within Xu Xian's heart, as vast and turbulent as a river. It felt strange, like the emotion came from some unknown connection beyond his control. Frustrated by the feeling, he turned his back on Xuanmin and summoned another barrage of divine lightning. Xu Hong was disheveled, his robes a mangled tapestry of reds and black. He was completely unrecognizable. Xu Xian stared at him for a moment, then glanced again at Xuanmin. This time he saw the patches of crimson blooming on Xuanmin's robes, the result of his link with Xu Hong. The sight was like a stab wound through Xu Xian, and the pain echoed right through his heart. Briefly, he went blank. Bald donkey? He murmured, uncertain. So 97. Xuanmin's eyes snapped open, his face as pale as his lips. He replied. He raised a hand to cast a cleansing spell, but it wasn't enough to stop the blood pouring out of him. Right after it was cleansed, more spread anew. Xu Xian's lightning abruptly ceased. His mind was chaos, and his pupils wavered between black and red. Taking advantage of his distraction, Xu Hong quietly restarted his chanting. Just a little more. You could almost taste it. The swarm of spots finally reached his brow and converged inward. The huge array seemed to respond. The stone statues shifted slightly. The child arrays, fueled by members of the Court of Imperial Sacrifices at Lake Dongting and Mount Wanxi, had also begun to shake. The people by the arrays had long since fallen unconscious. At Daze Temple atop Mount Jiangsong, the child array there quaked incessantly too, sending the acolytes sprawling everywhere. The chief diviner and chief ritualist were no exception. The life exchange array neared completion. Within Daze Temple, a soft sigh echoed through the hall. The chief diviner's fingers twitched. Through her stupor, she seemed to hear the state preceptor's voice, though it also sounded a little different. The low, deep voice sighed softly. You reap what you sow. Perhaps it was her final rally before death, but the chief diviner found the strength to open her eyes. As she observed the sea of blood around her, she suddenly seemed to understand something. With great effort, she forced her stiff thumb to move. Using the last of her blood, she drew a mark across the trail of blood leading to the stone effigy. In the language of arrays, this meant severance. The array's caretaker had reneged at the final critical moment, and the entire blood array instantly descended into frenzied chaos. You go, girl. I love that it's not Xuanmin, it's not Xu Xian, but it's the chief ritualist who just fucked up the array. I love that. At that moment, Lake Dongting, Mount Wanxi, and Mount Jiangsong all quaked as one. Just before the spots on Xu Hong's brow could fuse, they scattered. Startled, he hurriedly touched his brow. Before he could confirm anything, the stone statue at the array's center began to pale, its color fading. More accurately, the blood it had completely drained was now being returned, drop by drop. Since the source and destination had inverted, the blood within the disrupted array flowed in reverse, seeping back into the fingers of the unconscious people. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, let's go! The disorder within Daze Temple's child array was transmitted to the larger overseeing array, Bones Beneath the Land. Xu Xian and Xuanmin felt the ground lurch beneath their feet. The depths of the river stirred, restless and hungering to break through. In the blink of an eye, the signs of calamity arrived. A colossal rumbling tremor spread across the land, and the river erupted in a violent frenzy, no longer contained. Massive waves crashed against the shore, one after another. I love everyone independently screwing things up for Shu Hong. Yes. Me too, Truffle. With the changes in the blood arrays, the mighty array that had promised to bring peace to the people reversed, transforming into calamity of horrific scale. Hundreds of miles of mountains groaned, while thousands of miles of rivers rose. Floods slammed into the long banks. Houses teetered on the brink of collapse. Mountains fractured and crumbled. The natural disaster descended upon many prefectures along the great river. The screams and wails of civilians in far-off counties echoed for miles. As towering waves threatened to swallow nearby villages whole, their shouts blurred into a single desperate cry before the churning water crashed down. The colossal array convulsed, and the land writhed in unrest. At its anchor, the dragon bones bore the brunt of the onslaught. In that instant, Shu Xian felt as though jagged stones were grinding through his flesh and crushing his bones, even if the bones weren't actually in his spine. Ow! Ah! With a deafening crack like a collapsing mountainside, something within Shu Xian's back snapped. The fine threads holding his vertebrae together gave way under the immense strain. It had been too long since they'd been refined, and now they broke completely. The sensation in his legs vanished, and it wasn't just his legs that suffered. All 5 of his senses were under assault. The sounds around him dissolved into a muffled hum. His vision swam, and his sense of touch dulled. He felt as though he had become one with the very mountains and rivers the great array sought to control. Their agony was his, and their convulsions echoed within his flesh. All of this unfolded with blinding speed. There was no time to react. The world darkened as if layer after layer of heavy thunderclouds were descending until they smothered the ground. It wasn't the world that was fading. It was Shu Xian's sight. The instant this struck him, his only instinct was to turn his head to cast one last glance at the white figure on Mount Jiangsong. In that final glimpse, he saw the indistinct white form raise a hand. Then golden light erupted, countless threads of light that radiated outward. One by one, they snared the shuddering mountains and grasped the raging waves. Xuanmin stood there, his copper coins in hand. The flesh of his extended arm had already split from the strain, and his white robe was soaked in blood. But he paid those no heed as he desperately contained the land's fury. His other hand clenched into a fist. Boom! Something vast and immense rocked beneath the mountains. The wind's screams grew fiercer as the earth buckled and heaved, and the waves stampeded like maddened horses. Xuanmin's hand tightened around the copper coin. The blood staining his robes spread, blooming into a single crimson mass. Yet he seemed oblivious to this. He continued to squeeze his fingers into a fist. Rumble. After several strenuous attempts, something broke through the earth. A long section of a spinal cord. With its spiritual anchor gone, the entire array succumbed to chaos. Only a handful of spiritual artifacts were capable of quelling an array of such scale. In fact, there were only 2 in the entire world. Shu Hong had chosen dragon bones, so Xuanmin chose Buddha bones. With a shudder, 2 bloodied bones materialized from his waist. Though his flesh remained intact, the moment the Buddha bones left his body, Xuanmin's vitality began to drain at an alarming speed. His face turned pale as paper, though his eyes remained deep and dark as ink. The copper coin spun between his fingers, and the mountains parted beneath him. The ground split open with a thunderous crack, revealing a yawning abyss. The two Buddha bones were cast into its depths, and with a deafening rumble, the ground closed once more. Veins burst from the blood mole on Xuanmin's neck like a dying spider stretching its legs. Then it slowly curled them back in. As the blood mole dimmed, Shu Hong lost his last tether to life. He remained seated with his legs crossed, but his face aged decades in seconds, and the light in his eyes, once so like Xuanmin's, faded, veiled in gray mist. He'd struggled for years, but in the end, he couldn't escape death. During a person's final moments, they would recall many, many things, even things they believed to be long forgotten. His dimming eyes stared blankly at the sky, and something came back to him. On Mount Jiangsong, when the eminent person had taken him in, the weather had been the same. Looming black clouds, pouring rain, and raging winds that threatened to drown the mountains. It was the first time he had seen someone so transcendent, like they had been bathed in the light of dawn. Later, within the walls of the Tianji Institute, he'd learned that eminent person was the state preceptor. The position of state preceptor was passed down from one generation to the next. The first had hailed from the southern border, while that man was the second. And Shu Hong, who'd been brought back to the Tianji Institute, was destined to become the third. He'd called the state preceptor Shifu, though the man was always cold and taciturn. Throughout Shu Hong's life, he'd only had the chance to utter that title a few times. The years from childhood to adulthood had felt both agonizingly long and fleeting. Long, because he could idle away hours lost in thought while reading scriptures, and time would seem to crawl. Fleeting, because the passage of decades left no trace on his master. Much later, he'd learned that Buddha bones resided within his master's body. They granted him a lifespan far longer than ordinary men, and he aged much more slowly as well. Back then, all Shu Hang had felt was reverence and a desire to be like his master. That emotion had faded after many years because his master, who should have lived a long life, had perished in his 20s, all to save the common folk. What good were Buddha bones? He died young anyway. At the time, Shu Hong couldn't articulate whether he felt grief or something else. He only knew that sometimes, when he stood alone atop the Tianji Institute stargazing tower, the previous state preceptor would surface in his mind. Later still, he found himself at the foot of Mount Jiangsong, where he brought back his own successor, another child with Buddha bones. Despite his young age, the boy bore an uncanny resemblance to Shu Hong's long-dead master. He gave that child the original Dharma name of the second state preceptor, Xuanmin. The faint sense of covetous reverence Shu Hong had once felt resurfaced. At first, it was only a spark, but as Xuanmin grew older, the spark grew as well. During the 10-odd years when Xuanmin had been the state preceptor, he'd tried to suppress the feeling and convinced himself to stay away from the court. He'd failed. When he realized that he was aging uncontrollably, that one day he would return to dust, a covetous feeling twisted into a burning envy. Greed. Insatiable greed. As the black clouds grew heavier, so too did Shu Hong's eyelids. In his final moments of consciousness, he thought he saw a tidal wave crash down, and faintly from somewhere, the sound of weeping. This wasn't what he had intended. He'd only wanted to save lives while gaining something for himself. Somewhere along the way, greed had led him astray. A dying man's words are often kind, as Confucius said. Perhaps his noble master's spirit guided him, allowing him to reclaim a sliver of his original heart in the end. The debts he owed, though, would have to be repaid in another form. As his consciousness faded, Xu Hong fumbled for a string of copper coins, smearing them with the blood from his face. Dim golden threads unfurled from the coins, tethering the water threatening the nearby village. Xuanmin's Buddha bones had yet to fully stabilize the formation. The wind still cried as it whipped back and forth. The mountain still rumbled, groaning behind him. Countless screams and wails were shredded by the gale. The surging river was like 1,000 white steeds ready to leap into the sky, yet they failed to engulf the banks. For the hundreds of miles of mountains and the 1,000 miles of rivers were held back by countless golden threads. At the other end of those threads was Xuanmin, holding them in his grip as he knelt on one knee before Xuxian. The effects of his bones ordeal had yet to fade from Xuxian. He could neither see nor hear. His arms hung limply at his sides as he stood, motionless as a statue, his eyes vacant. His black robes were soaked, but not by the waves as it first seemed, for no waves could reach him. Rather, it was all cold sweat and blood, impossible to separate. Xuanmin coughed weakly, but he never looked away from Xuxian's face. His once white monk robes were drenched in red, and his fingers had taken on a deathly pallor. Slowly, he dispersed the spiritual cord he'd reclaimed, then pressed it back into Xuxian's body bit by bit. A faint glimmer danced in Xuxian's sightless eyes. Xuanmin covered them with his hand. After a long, silent look, he leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was fleeting, light as morning mist, yet heavy as the mountains and rivers. Xuanmin's coughing grew weaker, his hands still gently shielding Xuxian's eyes, until the cough faded entirely. As Xu Hong's life faded, his head slumped. Xuanmin's hand slid away, revealing Xuxian's bloodshot eyes. They were wide open, as if the slightest blink would send the tears pooling within to spill from their corners and down his cheeks. Imagine if we just, stopped for the week right there. We're not going to. But just imagine. Also, have some more pain. Pain. So if you remember with the mirror and the pool, this was the vision that he saw of Xuanmin's death. Back to that Bailu cave, I think. Insect cave. I mean, it's an amazing picture, but goodness does it hurt. Especially that one right up there. You literally can see him covering his eyes and leaning in to give him a kiss. Ow. And then this one where he's holding him back. Ah! So thankfully, we're not stopping here. We still have one more chapter left. But, ow. It definitely hurts to look at it. Chapter 38 of Centuries of 38 Centuries of Peace. The distinct metallic tang of blood clung to the air, carried by the riverside wind past Xuanmin's hand to Xuxian's nose. The churning river and quaking mountains reflected in his eyes, but his mind was blank. Though his senses were slowly returning, he felt as if he was still blind and deaf. Otherwise, how could the ever-stoic Xuanmin, who rarely even nodded, bow his head so low it seemed he would never raise it again? Otherwise, how could they be kneeling face to face, drenched in blood? Xuanmin's hand still on his face, without saying a single word. The power of the Buddha bones finally spread. The raging river calmed and the trembling mountains stilled. The golden threads faded. Xuanmin's copper coins jingled twice in the wind before falling from his hand, landing precisely where he had drawn a small array in blood. The lifetime of spiritual power forged into those coins, combined with the Buddha bones, would indeed ensure a century of peace. As the coin sank into the earth, a faint golden light rippled outward, spreading like gentle waves across hundreds, thousands of miles. A soft breeze lifted the blood-stained hem of Xuanmin's robe, revealing a delicate porcelain vial, already opened, its contents long gone. The golden light brushed Xuxian, and a tiny red spider, no larger than a grain of rice, tumbled from the dragon's collarbone. As if its task were complete, it curled its legs and lay still. Where it had sat, a pinprick-sized red mole now rested, subtly different from the one left by the life-sharing spider. It was a little raised to the touch. Xuxian didn't notice. He was staring at Xuanmin, unwilling to believe what he saw. Xuanmin's hand remained on Xuxian's face, cold as the deepest winter, with not the faintest pulse beneath the skin. It was so still, Xuxian's heart shook. As his missing bones melded into his body, his blood began to burn. Intense heat and swelling raced up his spine, and it should have made him sweat profusely from the heat. He did sweat, but it was from the ice-cold fear in his heart. The sensation of his spine reforming was an agony akin to being flayed alive, but he felt none of it. He noted neither his vitality nor his senses as they returned. He couldn't even lift his hands. After an eternity, he numbly reached up, gripped Xuanmin's wrist, and clutched his slipping hand. The hotter his own hand burned, the colder Xuanmin's felt. You... Xuxian's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper as he choked on the word. His grip was too tight. When he pulled, Xuanmin pitched to the side. Xuanmin's body slumped over, and Xuxian stiffly caught him. Xuanmin's chin rested on his shoulder, and one of his hands was clasped in Xuxian's, while the other was limp. From a distance, it might have looked like an embrace, save for the fact that one of them was already gone. The weight against Xuxian made the unshed tears in his eyes quiver. He shut them tightly, forcing the moisture back. Suddenly, his eyes flew open. Still holding Xuanmin, Xuxian fumbled in his robes until he found a small white vial, identical to the one hidden in Xuanmin's sleeve. It was one of the pair of vials from Baichang Cave. Xuxian tipped out the mother and child spiders with shaking hands. After several tries, he pinched the spider between his fingers. He thrust the mother spider to Xuanmin's neck, almost crushing its abdomen to prevent any struggle or escape. He watched the mother spider writhe twice before it sank its fangs into Xuanmin's neck. He watched the spider bite without blinking, to the point his eyes ached, but the skin there showed no changes. His entire body went rigid. Never before had he been so unwilling, so afraid even, to think about something for a second longer. The two figures, one black, one white, knelt amid the wreckage of Heishi shore, clinging to each other for an immeasurable time. So long did they sit that the blood around the stone statue in the reversed array faded, and the crimson lines on the ground silently pulled back. The 200 unconscious people lying there no longer looked as pale as death. A faint flush returned to their faces. They bore only a tiny wound on their thumbs, far too minor to drain all their blood, had it not been for the influence of the blood array. Now that the array had reversed, everything had reset. Aside from that tiny cut and a few scattered drops of blood near their hands, they'd lost nothing. A long, long time passed. Even Shushan's feverishly warm body had cooled against Xuanmin's icy touch. At last, a tiny red mole emerged on that patch of unresponsive skin. But the mole was faint. So faint, Shushan couldn't tell whether it was a sign of success or failure. Just then, some kind of winged creature plunged from the sky. Shushan remained unresponsive until the black shadow plopped down beside him. It flapped its wings and hopped closer to Shushan's hand, then dropped a dusty object from its beak to the ground. I knew they would use the spiders to share their lives. I was hoping. It flapped its wings and hopped closer to Shushan's hand, then dropped a dusty object from its beak to the ground below. It pecked at his fingers twice, trying to draw his attention. Shushan stayed in a daze for a while longer before he came to his senses. This was the bird Xuanmin had raised. The bird was highly intelligent, almost approaching sapience. Despite the painstaking effort it must have taken to chase them here, it showed no sorrow for its lifeless master. Instead, it hopped about a few times, nuzzling Xuanmin's limp hand, then tilted its head to look at Shushan. It seemed it wasn't the first time it had witnessed such a tragedy. Shushan stared at the bird for a moment, then shifted his gaze to the object it had dropped. It was a dusty cloth pouch, and there seemed to be something inside. It had made a faint clinking sound when it hit the ground. Poor bird, underworked and underappreciated. When the bird saw that Shushan was still motionless, it let out a soft sigh and hopped over to the pouch. It pecked and tugged at the fabric until at last its contents came tumbling out. Shushan froze. 5 copper coins. Their patterns and engravings looked identical to the ones Xuanmin had once used, and even the spiritual energy they carried was nearly the same. Shushan didn't need to touch them to sense it. Stranger still, the coin's aura unmistakably belonged to Xuanmin himself. The only difference was the thin cord binding the coins. It gleamed as though unweathered, probably because of the spiritual energy, but Shushan could tell that the string of coins was hardly new. In fact, it had to have been over a century old. The coins tumbled out of the pouch and rolled close to Xuanmin's limp hand, then emitted a faint hum, greeting their master after an eternity apart. A flicker of awareness returned to Shushan's numb senses. The blackbird's actions and the coin's reaction had jolted him back to his senses. It seemed Xuanmin might truly open his eyes again. He turned to examine the tiny mole on Xuanmin's neck once more. Perhaps it was his imagination, but the crimson mole no longer seemed quite so dull. Maybe it really had worked. Shushan loosened his grip on Xuanmin's hand. Only when he flexed his fingers did he realize how hard he'd been clutching it. The sudden release sent dull aches through his knuckles. He looped an arm around Xuanmin's back, ready to lift and carry him away from this place. But when he moved, something small tumbled from the folds of Xuanmin's sleeve, rolled over the back of his hand, and fell to the ground. Shushan paused and frowned. After a brief search of the blood-stained shore, his eyes landed on a dark red spider, no larger than a grain of rice. Oh, the maid, his brows pinched together. I think we found a typo. The made his brows pitch together. I think it was like either this made his brows pinch together or the bottle made his brows pitch together. After his run-in with the life-sharing spiders, Shushan had grown extra cautious around them. The moment he saw its round abdomen, his mind flashed to Baichong Cave. Soon, he saw the association he'd made wasn't unfounded. When he picked up the stiff red spider and turned it over in his palm, he found it had a black underside with a thin red line running across it. However, this couldn't be a life-sharing spider. The exoskeletons of the life-sharing spiders changed color to blend into their surroundings. If this had been one, it would have gradually paled to match his skin tone, yet the spider remained unchanged. How would a spider from Baichong Cave ended up here anyway? And why had it fallen from Xuanmin's sleeve? Had it been clinging to him? Shushan froze. Suddenly, he recalled something in the cave. Back then, Xuanmin had turned away to trap the life-sharing spider, leaving Shushan to retrieve 2 porcelain vials from his robes. Xuanmin had kept a hand over his catch the entire time and never showed him what the spider looked like. Once Shushan found one of the vials, Xuanmin picked up a female spider from his palm, handed it to him before accepting the other vial. At the time, Shushan had been too focused on sealing away the spider inside to pay attention to Xuanmin's actions. By the time he looked up, Xuanmin had already stoppered the second vial. A fleeting doubt had crossed his mind then. Why had Xuanmin needed to restopper the bottle when he'd never touched it? As Shushan recalled this, a suspicion took hold of him. Perhaps Xuanmin hadn't only captured the mother spider that day. There might have been something else, and that something had to be this scarlet spider. And he was sure it wasn't the only spider. It must have been part of a pair. Xuanmin had mentioned that Baichong Cave bred 2 types of spiders. Since the small spider wasn't a life-sharing spider, it had to be the other one. But Xuanmin had never explained what the second type was or what purpose it served. A little bewildered, Shushan pocketed the spider and studied Xuanmin's lifeless form in his arms. A fragile hope stirred in his chest. Could these spiders have been Xuanmin's contingency plan? A safeguard? Could it be? Shushan tightened his hold on Xuanmin and pressed his chin into the man's shoulder. His lips brushed against Xuanmin's icy neck, then the tip of his nose, before he finally buried his face in the hollow of Xuanmin's throat. Daze Temple on Mount Jiangsong was a small remote temple that had been founded over 300 years ago. Because it had been built during less prosperous times and had an isolated location, it never enjoyed great prosperity or attracted large numbers of worshippers. Its monks rarely numbered more than 10. Most had quiet dispositions and led peaceful lives. About 100 years later, right before the mountain temple had been burned by lightning, only 5 or 6 monks remained. They had spent their entire lives there and lived to a ripe old age. The only youth present was a boy from the southern border. Truth be told, the kindly old monks exchanged bemused glances when the boy arrived, thinking to themselves, "This child must be the fool of the century. With so many renowned temples to choose from, why pick our Daze temple?" That youth was blessed with striking features. High brows, refined features, and clear, deep eyes, as dark as ink. Despite his young age, he exuded an air of serene composure. Any temple would have been happy to accept him based on these traits alone. Yet for some reason, his heart was set on the remote little temple nestled in Mount Jiangsong. The elderly monks were delighted, but for the boy's own sake, they gently pressed him for a reason. The youth simply replied, "Daze Temple has called me here." Before he could take his vows, the temple that had supposedly called to him was struck by lightning, and much of it was reduced to smoldering ruins. Every monk perished in the blaze, except for that boy from the southern border. Years later, by chance, the youth befriended a kindred spirit around his own age. Decades after that, he would become the state preceptor, a guardian of the realm who warded off calamities and presided over the court of imperial sacrifices. This was because his dear friend happened to be someone rather special. A crown prince when they first met, and later the emperor. When the emperor's life neared its end, the grief-stricken state preceptor, unable to bear the loss, sought out methods to prolong his friend's life. Unfortunately, he was a step too late. By the time the ritual was ready, the emperor had already passed. Bound by compassion and a promise to his friend to safeguard the empire for 100 years, the state preceptor carried on. Yet a mortal's lifespan is ultimately finite. Worse, the toll of those life-extending rituals had left the state preceptor drained. The flame of his own life was flickering on the verge of going out. Thus he divined the fates, then retrieved his successor from the ruins of Daze Temple on Mount Jiangsong. His hope was to fulfill his old friend's dying wish, that no matter how dynasties rose and fell, there would always be an undying light to guide the way and bring peace to the land. Thus, the state preceptor took the Dharma name Tong Dang, same light, a title that would be passed down through generations. But the successor he'd brought back to the court of imperial sacrifices was still a toothless babe who couldn't speak. Bestowing such a weighty Dharma name on one so young risked crushing his fate. Besides, the time had not yet come for the state preceptor to retire. So for the boy's youth, he chose another name, Xuanmin, profound compassion. Xuanmin was a rather special existence. He had been born with a natural sarira within his body, a phenomenon known as Buddha bones. So a sarira is spiritual objects that purportedly inhabit the bodies of Buddhist masters. In ancient times, sarira would be collected from their owner's ashes post-cremation and enshrined. It was a manifestation of immense merit that would persist even through reincarnation. This made him the perfect successor. Though in public the state preceptor was a man of few words, he spoke freely with Xuanmin. To the youth he was both mentor and friend. I love that. I love that part. That's so sweet. During Xuanmin's upbringing, few ever saw his face, either because the Tianji Institute forbade unauthorized persons from entry or because the state preceptor had willed it so. Few knew of his existence in the first place. Years later, Xuanmin came of age and assumed his position. With that, the previous state preceptor and the original Tong Dang, who had long had a foot in the grave, passed away. He did. Good memory, Esper Lady. His life had carried a touch of legend, yet in the end it could be summed up simply. One kindred friend, one disciple. In all senses, it was a life well lived. Nevertheless, one thing lingered in his heart. Daze Temple on Mount Jiangsong. The lightning strike had been mere coincidence, wholly unrelated to him, but decades of being called a jinx had left him with a quiet, unshakable guilt around the temple. Even after death, it weighed on him. And so he remained at Daze Temple. Every winter solstice, every tomb-sweeping day, every ghost festival, he would light lamps for the kindly old monks who had once smiled at him centuries ago. He existed as neither ghost, nor spirit, nor attachment. He was a little like all of them. No one could see him, not mystics, not masters of the occult, not even those who possessed eyes capable of seeing the supernatural. To outsiders, the long-abandoned Daze Temple seemed to flicker with ghostly lantern light every year, just enough to spook the locals into avoiding it entirely. It was from this that its reputation as a haunted temple was born. And yes, one also showed up in Disabled Tyrant as a present for the Emperor. Today marked the 27th day of the 12th month. A fierce battle at the foot of Mount Jiangsong felt like yesterday, though in truth almost a month had passed. The wreckage below had long been cleared, and a year-end snowfall had buried the last remnants of the conflict, restoring an uneasy peace. As night fell, pinpricks of light bloomed in the darkened ruins. There were 6 lanterns in total, the glowing softly against the void. "Look, Shixian, the ghost lights are back!" The young novice perched at a distant temple window, craning his neck toward Mount Jiangsong while beckoning to his senior disciple. The ghost lights were unpredictable in their appearances, and sightings were rare. This was only the second time the novice had glimpsed them in over a decade at the temple. Despite the eerie rumors that swirled about them, the sight itself incited little terror. The dancing lights cast a warm golden glow that soothed rather than unsettled. There was nothing sinister or eerie inside Daze Temple. Before the 6 self-lighting lanterns stood a white-robed monk, meticulously trimming their wicks. However, he was only visible to others like himself. This was none other than the youth from the southern border, the lone child who had entered the temple so long ago, the first state preceptor, the true Tong Dang. And there was someone like him, someone who could see him within this abandoned temple. Neither ghost nor spirit, he also wore a long white robe. Currently, he was cross-legged on a reed cushion in the corner, his face pallid, his eyes lightly closed. It seemed he was meditating. Even in his current state, caught between ghost and man, his striking features and unyielding, icy demeanor remained unchanged. It was Xuan Min. Tong Dang serenely stood before the 6-piece lanterns, his hands clasped in a mudra. Then, with a whirl of his sleeves, he turned and walked over to Xuan Min. Under the light of the lanterns, he observed Xuan Min's left hand, which rested atop his knee. Nestled in the juncture of his pointer finger was a small blood-red mole, no larger than a pinhead. The surface was a little raised, a perfect match for the one on Shuxian's collarbone. "The mole's showing," Tong Dang said, withdrawing his gaze before giving Xuan Min another irritated look. "It's a wonder you could think of such a trick amid that predicament. Letting out the spider, having it bite you, then bite him. That had to take at least a sentence's worth of time. If you had the time for that, you should have put up more of a fight, maybe even managed a few dying words." Xuan Min's eyes remained shut, and his lips didn't even twitch. It was hard to tell whether he hadn't heard him or was simply choosing to ignore him. "They're not as venomous as the life-sharing spiders, but their bite is hardly pleasant. Did you develop a taste for them?" Tong Dang said sardonically after Xuan Min's lack of response. After a moment of silence, his eyes closed and face still blank, Xuan Min finally spoke. "You are the one who raised them. The unspoken message, and you're trying to warn others against getting bitten? You sure have some gall." Upon his body losing all vitality, Xuan Min had come to in the abandoned Daze Temple. His form had coalesced rested roughly 2 days prior and stabilized only last night. During those 2 days, he couldn't open his eyes or speak. All he could do was hear and listen to the nearby voice speak, recounting old matters as if reminiscing. Through the fragmented accounts, he learned this person was Tong Dang, the first state preceptor and his master in his previous life. Both of the spider breeds within Bai Chong Cave had been his creations. Xuan Min had only tasted the life-sharing spider's effects. Years ago, before he left the Tianji Institute to live a solitary life in the bamboo pagoda, he noticed subtle changes concerning Shu Hong's lifespan. Though Shu Hong never removed his mask, even within the institute, Xuanmin had discerned his de-aging through the faint changes in the wrinkles on his neck. Even then, Xuanmin had suspected that the transformation had something to do with himself. Shu Hong's words during that period always carried some deeper meaning. He spoke as if he owned Xuanmin, but also like he was a little grateful. At the time, his master's kindness remained at the forefront of his mind, so even when he sensed something, he dismissed it. It was only much later that he looked into the truth of the life-sharing spiders. By then, Shu Hong's greed had escalated to stealing dragon bones, and Xuanmin's own memory loss followed shortly after. Thus, the question of Shu Hong planting a life-sharing spider on him was simply put off, never to be addressed. Only on death's door did he find the real answer. Xuanmin had always been rigorously disciplined, leaving little leeway for others to exploit him. Looking back now, there had only been one occasion. It had happened the autumn before he left the institute and returned the state preceptor's mantle to Shu Hong. During meditation, he'd accidentally slipped into a frenzied Zen state. For 3 days and nights, he'd been in an unconscious trance. His guard against Shu Hong had been low then. It was possible the life-sharing spider had been planted during that period. Regardless, with his body now dead, that was all in the past. The spider was with a hold on him now wasn't the life-sharing spider, but the other breed from Baichong Cave. Back then, Tong Dang's true aim had been creating the life-sharing spider. Breeding the other kind was purely an unintended consequence of his troubled mind. The emotions that spider contained were too complex, so Tong Dang didn't know what to name it. He had just called it the Nameless Spider. Once, Xu Xian had offhandedly asked about their purpose, if they really bound people for 3 lifetimes like the legend said. Xuanmin had denied it. He hadn't lied. The Nameless Spider had nothing to do with one's next 3 lives. Where life-sharing spiders were a mother-child pair, these came in pairs of fortune and misfortune. The red spider bestowing blessings, the black one curses. The tiny mole on Xuanmin's hand came from the black spider's bite. Well, the one on Xu Xian's collarbone stemmed from the red. Once these blood moles formed, it meant that the black spider's victim, though dead, would neither decay nor dissipate. They'd continue to exist as something like a ghost or spirit. They would shoulder all calamities and suffering meant for their counterpart across infinite lifetimes, while bequeathing all their own destined fortunes to the other. The price? To be excluded from the cycle of rebirth for all eternity. So it wasn't for 3 lifetimes. It was forever. With the appearance of this mole, what lies ahead is a boundless loneliness, a never-ending existence, Tong Dang said. He stood in the doorway, eyes narrowed as he watched the moonlit heavens. Eventually, he turned back to Xuanmin. There are benefits, certainly. You'll never lose your memory again. You will remember all that you should with increasing clarity, as if it were yesterday. There are drawbacks, however. No matter how deeply rooted your memories, you will be invisible to all, even a dragon. So tell me, do you regret it? Xuanmin remained silent for a long moment, as if still unwilling to engage. This attitude mirrored their master-disciple dynamic from a century prior. Finally, Xuanmin countered with quiet precision. You bear the mark from the spider as well. Do you regret it? Tong Dang made a non-committal hum and said no more. Regrets. Life, death, fortune, and misfortune were not things to be dealt with so lightly. He'd made his choice. Even if the eastern sea turned to dust and his bones to ash, he'd harbor neither bitterness nor regret. Tong Dang really needs a hobby or four. He has a hobby. His hobby is lighting lanterns. That's a hobby. Also, apparently lecturing his old reincarnated disciple that's now kind of a ghost, but not really. So, well, we have one arc left, but you will just have to wait until Tuesday because we are done tonight. But at least we got over the pain. Yay! We survived the pain! But in any case, thank you all so much for joining me. I had a great time reading, even with all the pain. Lighting lanterns and breeding weird spiders aren't hobby. I mean, he helped take care of his friend who became the emperor. But like, I mean, that's got to be hobby or have hobby-like connotations. But yes, as always, it is a joy to read with all of you. And for everyone listening later, I hope you enjoyed as well. Tong Dang is also gay. I mean, I don't doubt it. His friend. Even if it's a platonic gay couple, as it sounded like it was. Yeah. Have a great weekend, everybody. I will see you next time for our final live stream of Copper Coins. Yeah, friend. All right. As I said before, there might be a surprise live, like short live, me just showing some stuff or just chatting. I don't know, Saturday. But don't plan on it. If it does pop up, it'll just pop up. But yeah. Anyway. But yes. Bye-bye.